Welcome to the Creative Ops Compass podcast, your navigation system for turning creative chaos into strategic impact. My name is Jesse Krinsky. I'm a creative operations consultant and the founder of InFocus Consulting. I help in-house creative teams streamline workflows, improve stakeholder relations, and elevate their role as strategic partners.
That's your job as a leader, to make sure that the business objectives and the things going on that, you're involved with that they aren't, get down to the team in a way that they can understand and take action on.
That's Jen Perry. She's the executive creative director at Vagrants, a creative agency in Boston. Jen has had an unusual career trajectory. She started at big network agencies, then went in-house where she built a powerful creative team, and then, unlike most people who go in-house, she went back to the agency side. That experience of living on both sides gave her something rare: genuine empathy for the pressures and constraints that both creatives and stakeholders face. And in my work with in-house creative teams, I constantly see the risks of that empathy gap. It undermines the work, it damages relationships, and it keeps teams stuck in a reactive, order-taken mode. Jen and I talked about why empathy matters, what it takes to build it, and how it transforms not just your relationships, but the quality of the work itself. If you've ever felt frustrated by stakeholders who seem to dismiss good creative, or if you lead a team that struggles to communicate their value to the business, this conversation will challenge some assumptions and give you practical ways to bridge that gap. Jen, thanks so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to talking to you because you have a very unusual background, an unusual story. You started in the agency world and you went in-house and you went back to the agency side again. Walk me through that. How did that happen? Why did you make those jumps from one to the other?
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I remember over the years hearing, once you go brand side, you're never going to go back. And I had seen more and more people going brand side. So when this opportunity came up to become part of a tech company, it was just sort of like right place, right time, right mentality, where I was interested in trying something new at that time. And I was very curious about sort of the other side, so to speak, and kind of getting more context and more information about what that's like. You get a brief on the agency side, but you don't see what really goes on the inner workings of a company and a marketing org. So I was very curious to learn about that.
And what made you decide to go back to the agency world?
Yeah. When I was brand side, I thought that I was going to stay brand side. What made me go back was a specific opportunity that came my way. The tech company that I had been working for had just been bought by a venture capitalist firm. And you know what happens when a company gets bought? Of course, there's leadership shuffles, there's all kinds of reorgs and things like that. So it was sort of a tumultuous time at the company at the same time that this other small agency reached out to me. And if it hadn't been the type of agency that it was, I probably wouldn't have gone for it. But it was work that was all around purpose-driven, mission-driven organizations, and so it was all about sort of work for good, and that's something that I remember, when I was kind of coming up in the industry, I remember always saying to my creative partner, my art director, "Man, I wish there was just an agency that I could work for that, only did work for good causes." So I could feel really good about it versus, some of the things that we need to sell, which maybe I don't feel so great about, like, soda or things like that. And so it's sort of like a way to kind of absolve myself from some of the other things that maybe I didn't feel so great about making ads for in the past. And it was an opportunity to build and grow the creative department. And as a person that's kind of a builder, that was really appealing to me.
Something about that is very, very interesting because one of the unfortunate truths of agency life is you have to often just do the work that arrives. Whatever client is willing to hire you,
Right.
your agency, you need to work for. That was one of the challenges that I struggled with doing work for clients that I felt icky about. So it's amazing that you were able to find an agency that would allow you work for clients that you could feel good about. But I want to dive into another aspect of this, which was I'll often say that the major value proposition of an agency is the breadth, whereas on the in-house side, it's the depth, right? When you're
Yeah.
in-house, you get to know ideally the brand, the people, the mission
Mhm.
behind it all. Whereas when you're on the agency side, you get exposed to many more
Right.
styles and more people, which is, and they both have value, but
Right.
it's important to understand that difference there. So, what are some of the things that you learned in house that you couldn't have learned on the agency side?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was hugely eye-opening, especially someone like me who had come pretty exclusively from the big network agencies, coming into a tech company in the suburbs, right? I mean, everything about it was a huge culture shock. And I remember distinctly when I went and I started that job, I remember distinctly telling my agency friends, it's like if you know when you go visit the client for a client meeting, it's like that except I work there all the
You're there every
time.
day.
Yeah. And then, once I was there, it was like a veil had been lifted. And I realized that there are so many things that are kept away from creative people at those bigger traditional shops. There's a very specific way of working where you really are kept. I often joke it's like you're kept under the stairs, like Harry Potter. You're not allowed to, you can't interact with the client.
Yeah.
You can't interact too much with the account team, even. And I feel it does creatives a real disservice because when I arrived in that environment, at first it was really a huge culture shock. I had to do things like write marketing emails. I had never written a marketing email in my life. And when I went and started that job, I had already had 15 years of experience in the industry. So it's not like I was inexperienced. It's just I hadn't done that type of work because I wasn't exposed to it. And there was never a need at those bigger traditional shops. There was never really a need for that
The roles
kind.
are far more bifurcated when you're an agency, or in the big
Right.
agency, that is, right? When you're in house, especially if you're starting a team, it's all hands. You're doing everything basically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was huge. It was a huge learning curve. It's just like parenting where you can know something in theory and you can really think you know it, and then you're in it, and it's completely different, right? And so I always knew philosophically that what I did at the agency was, this much of what the clients are dealing with day to day. But once I was embedded in it, it was so eye-opening. I realized how busy they are. That was a big one. That was a really big one. Because, I think on the agency side, sometimes you think that the campaign that you're working on is sort of like the center of the universe. You think it's a bigger deal than it is actually to the client because they're juggling so many different initiatives and politics and bosses and boards and CEOs and different things to, different people to answer to that all have competing agendas. And so one thing that was really eye-opening was how busy they are. The other thing was very eye-opening is just how small the agency's part is
Mm.
of the whole, right? Which I knew in theory, but seeing it close up was really crazy and eye-opening. And just getting to know all of the different parts of marketing. I feel like I didn't even have a good grasp on marketing, like holistically, until I came into that environment and understood all of the different types of roles that go into a more sophisticated marketing org.
One of the biggest challenges that in-house creative teams face is communicating their value in business terms, in terms that matter and that are relevant to their stakeholders, to leadership, often because creatives don't have an understanding of it. They don't have a background. They don't have the education in that, in not just how to communicate, but in understanding why what they are doing matters
Right.
to the larger enterprise. They're great at delivering beautiful creative, but they often struggle to connect that to things like revenue, conversion rates, or KPIs, whatever is relevant to leadership.
100%. Yeah.
So when you went in house, how much visibility did you have into the business performance and the metrics and connecting the work that you were doing to the larger goals of the company?
So much more than I ever had on the agency side. So much more, like exponentially more understanding.
I'm going to interrupt because how did you do that? Because that is a challenge that so many teams have, is that the stakeholders either keep it to themselves or they don't even know to share this, right? And a lot of creatives
Right.
don't even know what questions to ask. So
Mhm.
how did you get that insight?
Right. I mean, I think I was in a little bit of a unique position because I wasn't an individual contributor. I was coming in to run a team and build a team.
Mhm.
So I was in a more senior role. And so I was more involved in the leadership meetings with the, CEO or the CMO and things like that. So I could then take that information and kind of translate it down to my direct reports. And I have to give credit to my boss at the time, Tim Weldon, who had come from the agency side, but had been brand side for a very long time. I think that he really helped to teach me how to think and speak like a business person. And he helped me to understand exactly what you're talking about, that you need to take all of your wild creativity and the team's creativity, and you need to take that and translate it into language that folks care about. The VP of marketing isn't as excited as you are about this particular, film technique. They want to know, how is it going to impact the bottom line? How is it going to make me look good to my higher ups? Everybody has somebody to answer to. I do think that a lot of the time there's this culture at the traditional shops where it's almost like understanding the client as a human being and their very real challenges is not something that really is prioritized for the creatives. It's almost like, well, just let the account team worry about that, or the strategy team will worry about that, or the leadership team will worry about that. Because that is the structure. The idea is to protect creative from all of the other stuff so that they can focus on the creative, which in theory I understand. But in practice, what it does is it actually, I think, stunts creative growth because you're not understanding all of the different aspects of the business. And I think that the fact that I entered into brand side with 15 years of experience and still there was so much that I did not know, I think is a testament to the fact that I was sort of, kept under the stairs like Harry Potter in a lot of instances. And that's just the structure and the setup.
There's also a game of telephone that happens, right?
Yes,
Because
big
the
time.
account director gets to talk to the client, in the agency, setup, and then he or she communicates the needs or the brief to the producer, who then maybe communicates that to the editor, and oftentimes the editor, for if it's a video, never gets to even speak to the account director, let alone hear from the client.
Mhm.
And so you have translations or mistranslations along the way oftentimes that ends up ballooning budgets and taking more time, which ideally you wouldn't have in-house. But I want to dive into something else you said a little more. You were very fortunate that your manager at the time, Tim, seems like he empowered you. You had access to leadership. You were able to, if not maybe ask questions, hear what was going on. That's not the case a lot of times in in-house environments. So I'm curious, how did having that greater amount of context about the business side, how did it change the way you approached creative projects and the way you ran your team?
Oh my gosh, it completely changed the way that I ran my team, thought about creative projects, thought about how to talk about creative to marketers and other folks outside of marketing. Things like quantifying how many jobs your team did in a year,
Mm.
right? Right? So, most in-house teams use like Workfront or Asana or something like that, right? So, reporting from those tools and translating that into, here's the amount of jobs we did, here is the type of work it was, here is the team we did it for. And just I think sort of this idea of managing up and of sharing information in a way that folks can understand.
Mm.
So, I think that in the past, there were a lot of assumptions, I think, that I was making about what people knew and didn't know or what people understood and didn't understand. And I think maybe the other way too. Like I think marketers actually as well make a lot of assumptions about maybe what the creative team knows or understands, you know? And so I learned a lot more about taking the time to really translate the information and educate and help people to understand what's going on, um, from creative to, marketers and outside of marketing. And in the same way, I made an effort to kind of get out of my comfort zone, out of the creative team, and start trying to understand people's roles in different parts of the organization proactively.
So when you did that, when you started understanding or trying to understand people's roles, I have to imagine that helps you also understand their motivations and their interests and their needs, their fears. And that's so important for anybody to understand when they're working with another person. But it's next to impossible to do when you're outside, right? When you're on the agency
Right.
side.
Yep.
When you're in house, in an ideal situation, you have the opportunity to, again, to go deep, to understand the people who you're working with. In my experience, there's this fundamental misunderstanding on both sides, right? Creatives think that stakeholders don't get it or don't care about good work, and stakeholders can think that creatives are, you know, very precious artists who just can't handle tough feedback. So, how would you describe the typical attitudes that creatives and stakeholders have toward each other?
Yeah, I think this actually applies outside of an in-house org as well, where I think creatives assume that outside of creative, nobody cares about creative or gets excited about creative or could even possibly understand our thought process or what's cool and what's not or what's interesting and what's not. So I think there's sort of an assumption of we're the only people who really get it. And then there's an assumption I think from the other side, it's a kind of a same assumption. We're the only people that really get the business. These people just wanna make things that are cute and cool because they just wanna have fun and make cute little things, and they're trying to there's sort of an assumption that creative is trying to, like, trick people into making something for their own
Totally.
personal gain or their own agenda.
So, when you went in house, did your view of stakeholders change there? And what did you learn about the pressures and the constraints that they're dealing with that a lot of creatives don't know about or don't think to worry about? How did that affect how you worked with them and how you led your team to work with your stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that has completely changed the entire trajectory of my career. It's changed the entire way that I look at doing creative. It's completely changed the way that I look at clients. I think one of the things that really stood out is that they're just like us. They're actually just like us. You know that I think it's like People Magazine or Us Weekly is like stars, they're just like us.
Celebrities, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I joke that, clients are just like us. They have fears, they have deadlines, they have anxieties, they have bosses that are mad at them about this or that. They have people that they have to impress, they have a promotion that they're trying to get, they have mortgages to pay, they have kids, they have pressures, all of that. So from there, I take that and I try, to take that insight and kind of educate people on my teams. And one of the things that I feel like is a refrain that I would say a lot is, guys, I understand, I value creativity too. I'm a creative, right? Like I love getting weird as much as the next person. But you have to understand as well, this isn't your personal creative playground. This is a business, you know? And it's hard for me as a creative, like it's kind of hard sometimes to say those things because I get where people are coming from, but it really isn't. It's not our little creative playground. It's a business. We are solving business problems with creativity, and that's what I have to remind people all the time. So I like to bring it back to the business reality and to the brief. And I want people to take it to the weirdest place they can, and I'll rein them in.
Mm.
So I don't want to stunt anyone's creativity at all, but I think people do need to remember that there are real business realities that we're trying to solve with this work. And it's not just about, winning an award.
So, on a practical basis, how can creative leaders actively develop empathy towards their stakeholders? What are some of the daily habits or approaches that actually make a difference to foster that empathy?
Yeah. I mean, I think this sounds so simplistic, but talking more to people that maybe you wouldn't normally talk to, spending time trying to understand people that maybe are outside of your comfort zone, like for example, product marketing, right? That's very technical. When you're at a tech company, they know all the ins and outs of the product, right? Or even the sales team, people that you haven't spent a lot of time with because coming from the traditional agency side, you don't really spend time with product marketers. You spend time with like the brand marketers or the CMO, right? A little bit higher up or a little bit of a different part of the business, I should say. And you don't get a lot of time with like the product marketing or the UX team. And so spending time with people who have a completely different understanding of the business, a completely different agenda than you do, a different set of expectations placed upon them. You learn so much. Um, so it's the product marketing team, but also the sales team, you know, which sounds very uncool to most creatives. But here's something super simple. Have you ever listened to a sales call? When you're on the brand side, you have the opportunity to go talk to the sales team and listen to their sales calls and understand what's going on with the consumer at that point where they're considering, buying your product. That's huge. You don't have that on the agency side. You can get these insights about the audience, about the customer that you just don't have when you're outside.
So one of the things along these lines that I always recommend to clients is having more conversations that are not project based, not waiting until you receive a brief to talk to stakeholders,
Mhm.
but also not only talking to people who are your immediate stakeholders, for instance, the marketing teams, right? And there's a few reasons why I think that's valuable. One is you get to understand more of the business, which has its own value because then the creatives can come up with ideas that maybe the marketers who are coming to them with briefs haven't thought of. But also, the more people that you talk to and the more conversations you have that are not transactional in nature, it positions the creatives as people who are committed to the enterprise as a whole, but also to understanding the other person, right? And not only that,
Mhm.
but as you get to have these conversations, you understand them a little more. You understand the pressures that they're dealing with, like you were saying before, right? When you're just working on a campaign or a project together, as a creative, you wouldn't necessarily know that this person is struggling with their manager.
Right.
If you're just working off of the one project based on that brief, again, it's more of a transactional relationship, which undermines, again, that value, the value proposition of being in house that a lot of teams just don't take advantage of. And that's because they feel they don't have the time for it. But more often, it's just not something that they've considered because if they've come from the agency world where things are more transactional,
Yep.
and not as relationship based, then it's not a mindset that they necessarily have. So yeah, absolutely. Having those conversations, especially ones that are not based around the give and take, are immeasurably valuable. So in addition to fostering empathy for stakeholders, how do you as a leader recommend practicing empathy for your own team members, especially if they're frustrated with the feedback they're getting or the stakeholder dynamics? Because it can be easy as a leader to get frustrated, just like we do with our
Right.
children, just saying, I just need you to do this.
Yep.
But they're also dealing with their own challenges. How do you, as a leader, maintain that empathy for those who are working for you?
It's a little bit easier for me with the people that I manage because I'm a creative myself and I understand where they're coming from. So I can put myself in their shoes for sure. And often it all just comes back to information. I have more information than they do. I am privy to more conversations than they are. I am in more rooms than they are, right? So it's my job as a leader to take that information and translate it to them in a way that makes sense and has an impact to them. And I think a lot of the time people sort of hoard information or they sort of forget to disseminate the information. And that's your job as a leader. It's not a nice to have, it's not optional. That is literally your job is to make sure that the business objectives and the things going on that, you're involved with that they aren't get down to, to the team in a way that they can understand and kind of like move forward with and take action on. So I think really like, my job as a leader is to kind of it's almost like a reconnaissance mission. Like, I have to go out and talk to all the different people and understand what's going on in all the different teams and where my team is able to make an impact across the business. And then I have to take that all in and make sure that it gets to my team.
Jen, thank you so much. This is such an important aspect of creative leadership that is too often overlooked in the day to day need to just get things done.
Right.
But when we take a moment to pause and think about who we're working with and how to work with them better, it only helps the process. And your perspective here has been so clear and so important and so valuable. Thank you for sharing it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it.
So let's recap the key insights from today's conversation. First, stakeholders are just people. They're dealing with the same pressures you are: deadlines, bosses, budgets, and fears about job security. When you approach them with that understanding, tensions start to ease, relationships strengthen, and really the whole creative process runs more smoothly. Second, information sharing is part of your job as a leader. You need to translate business context down to your team and creative value up to stakeholders. Like Jen said, you're on a reconnaissance mission, gathering information from different parts of the organization and making sure it gets to the people who need it. Your team can't be strategic partners if they don't have the context to think strategically. And third, get out of your comfort zone. Listen to sales calls, talk to product marketing, spend time with people outside your immediate circle. Have conversations that aren't project-based. Don't wait for a brief to come in to start building relationships with stakeholders. Those relationships and that context will make your creative work more impactful and will help position your team as genuine partners instead of order takers. The common thread through all of this is empathy, understanding that we're all just trying to solve business problems with creativity, and we're all dealing with our own pressures and constraints. It can be a harder skill to practice than process improvement or workflow optimization, but it's just as essential. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what creative ops challenges you're facing. What topics would help your team work better? And if you work with in-house teams, whether you're an agency partner, a stakeholder, or a freelancer, I'd love to hear your perspective too. Reach out through the contact info in the show notes. Thanks for listening.